Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like many of my colleagues, I believe in the importance of funding our surface transportation infrastructure. And reliable infrastructure does represent a critical investment in advancing our safety and commerce. The Highway Trust Fund has served to equitably distribute funds to all states, rural and urban, and is the linchpin of our transportation system. As many here are aware, the Congressional Budget Office projects that the Highway Trust Fund will face a deficit of well over $100 billion in the 5 years following the FAST Act expiration. So that's why I've introduced the Build USA Infrastructure Act, which would address the near-term solvency of the Highway Trust Fund without raising taxes on hardworking Americans. I would like to ask our state DOT directors, Mr. Panos and Mr. Bott, how important is certainty in the formula funding to your state's transportation systems? And when it comes to maintaining our roads and bridges, is there really any substitute for this critical apportioned funding? Mr. Bott, would you like to start, please?
Thank you so much, Senator. It's funding certainty is everything. And, I do conservative talk radio once a month. I just go on the show, and I got, it's not always a love fest, but I think it's important for government to go out and talk to all of our constituents. And somebody said, why did you stop this project at point X? Why didn't you, any fool could see that all you had to do was continue it on down another 20 miles. But unfortunately, we have to have logical termini that are based on the transportation need and the financial need. And so one of the best parts about the FAST Act was getting us out of that cycle of, continuing resolutions around funding. If we have certainty around funding, then we can make better plans, and it costs states and all taxpayers less money when we have certainty.
And Mr. Panos.
For Wyoming and surface transportation, I think that certainly the idea of certainty in funding and federal funding is very, very important to us. We're very conservative in terms of how we look at financing our system. Our system is not being expanded as we speak. It's being preserved. And so we are just getting in enough money to preserve the system that we have now, our 2,000 bridges and 7,000 miles of roads. So for us, we take a very conservative role. So I think that the proposal that identifies the proposal that you're talking about, I think identifies that you're referring to, identifies a couple of things. One, it identifies that the Highway Trust Fund is not going to be a consistent source of funding after 2020, and that's critically important to us because we're not expanding. We're just preserving what we have there. The investment's already been made by the federal government. And the second is that it really looks at the process, the regulatory review of the projects and looks at how time-consuming that is and the need to improve that. And so we support both of those things. Those are things that I think not only Wyoming but other rural states would agree with. So it's good that you stepped up and put some of those ideas front and center for us to look at. How we go about that, we'll work with Congress. Obviously, we'll work with Congress over the next few months to develop. But I think they're solid ideas. But we, like Colorado, are looking for consistency.
Yeah, thank you for your compliment of the proposal. I think it's really important to identify a consistent revenue source without raising taxes at the federal level to be able to fund beyond maintenance, because we all need to make sure we have that capacity in the future as well. And you mentioned a second part of my proposal that really addresses the critical delays that projects are faced when they have to wait for that federal government approval. And I can tell you that my state has spent time and money on those burdensome Federal Highway Administration processes that really don't change any outcomes moving forward. For example, we're looking at upgrading a substandard Dodge Street S-curve project in Omaha, and that has seen costs grow by $3 million because of these burdens that are out there. Again, this idea that's in the Build USA Infrastructure Act, it's based on a proposal that I was able to get advanced in the state of Nebraska that's proved successful, and hopefully we will be able to have a conversation on that here. But I would ask you both, Mr. Panos, you addressed part of it, but I mean, I believe the greater state authority over this approval process is going to, because we've shown that it's going to move that approval process forward without really taking shortcuts. We're still going to meet the requirements that are there, but I think it's a better system to put in place and a better use of taxpayer dollars. Would either of you like to address that? Just on the delays you've faced with going through the Federal Highway Administration.
Thank you, Senator. I'm quite torn on the answer that I give you, and I say this with all respect. I, as a director of DOTs, have fought with the Federal Highway Administration to try and expedite projects. Over the years where we were ready to go on something, and so on the one hand, expediting projects is very good. We have a big project, a $1.2 billion viaduct replacement in Denver right now that's about over a decade in the planning process. And some people would say, well, that took 13 years to get to construction. How ridiculous. There's a school that's right beside that project. If my children went to that school, I wouldn't want a state DOT to come in and just say, hey, we're moving the road right beside you. We're taking 63 homes in the process of that. And one of the federal requirements that we have to follow is there are certain rules and regulations. When we take property, we have to show a burden, and we need the property, and we have to follow rules around relocating people. And so as the state DOT person, I would love for there to be fewer regulations. As someone who is impacted by the project, I think that some of those federal regulations do serve a purpose.
And I wouldn't disagree with you on that, but I think if we can expedite, that would always be a saving. I apologize, I'm over my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Fischer. Senator